Okay, let's get into it, shall we? Let's jump over to renderography and just take a look at what we're going to be accomplishing this week. Kind of start off the day with our 10,000-yard description. GCOM 424, painting hard surfaces. So today's entire conversation is going to revolve around working inside of Photoshop and continuing to explore the process and the technique of painting our diffuse texture maps. Okay, there's actually a lot that goes into this art form and a lot that goes into this stage of creating our diffuse texture maps. I overheard someone talking, and I apologize for eavesdropping on your conversation, before class talking about the role of textures, and I think it was Seth in the hallway. And Seth was commenting that in this modern day architecture for video games, it really is all about the textures. The textures really are the driving element that's going to allow us to create the photorealism and the effect that we're after on our games, on our game art assets. So it's important that we spend some cycles in a couple of weeks really digging in and exploring the process of generating some good-looking textures, okay? This week is going to be all about hard surface objects. We're going to take a look at two. We're going to take a look at some metallic choices. Your homework this week is going to give you an opportunity to do something really kind of fun and exciting. It's a blacksmith shop sign. We're going to start working over the next couple weeks on a much larger project. Over the next 3 weeks, you're going to be making a blacksmith shop. And this is just the first phase of the construction process for that blacksmith shop. Don't worry, I'm not expecting you to model a single thing this week. I've provided you with all the geometry that you'll need for this week's homework and lab exercise with the intent that you guys use these assets in the blacksmith shop that you're going to be making next week. Next week, we're going to change gears a little bit and really start focusing on the process of generating textures and models on a much larger scale. Admittedly, over the past 7-8 weeks, we've been focusing on very small elements within inside of our scenes, right? Props, for the most part. Wine barrels, crates, dumpsters. These are small objects that are ultimately going to exist within a much larger universe in our game. Well, next week, we're going to start talking about the process of modeling and working at a much larger scale. How do we do buildings? What's the strategies on both the geometry and the texture side of things to make these much larger objects within our scene? Important elements to talk about, and this is going to lead into that discussion I think very nicely. So this week you're going to be making a couple different types of maps. You're going to be making a diffuse texture map, and you're also going to be creating a bump map. And the bump map is an important one. I'll show you why here momentarily. Okay, this is going to be the first new map type that we're going to be generating here in GCOM 424. We've been focusing a lot on creating diffuse texture maps. Well, today we're going to extend it a little bit and start talking about the role of bump maps through the lens of interactive real-time gaming. Okay, I would also like you. We'll come back to the details of some of the requirements of the homework later. But you're going to be making a blacksmith shop. To give you a kind of a sneak peek, if you will, I actually have the blacksmith shop sign project open. There we go. Ta-da! So there's the project file. Okay, this is going to be the foundation that you're going to be working within for your texture this week. So I've done the hard part for you. I've done the modeling. I've done all the UVing for you. So you're just going to be focusing on the process of texturing this bad boy. If you go over to the UV island section. Here it is. There's all the UVs. Now we have some challenges that are in front of us. I haven't packed the UVs yet, okay? So I'm going to leave that one up to you. Part of the process of working inside of the texturing pipeline is to make some decisions, okay? And I'm forcing you guys to make some very critical decisions on how you want to approach texturing this object. The UVs are done. They're beautifully crafted. You shouldn't have any problems, shouldn't be any need to go in and re-UV map these elements. But now you need to start strategically thinking of how you're going to approach the texturing stage. Some more on that later. Okay? I'm giving you kind of carte blanche on this one. You're making a sign that will ultimately go on your blacksmith shop. Okay? Everything you need to have fun with this project is right in front of you. So it should be a good one. Should be kind of a fun one. Yeah. Cool, very simple little model. Okay. All right, for your lab assignment this week, we're going to change gears and work with this bad boy. Okay, this is kind of a cool like science fiction wall tile, and the whole idea behind this is to continue practicing working with our textures, okay, and creating textures. In this one, we're going to focus on metallic textures, and we're going to go through some ideas here momentarily in Photoshop that will allow us to very quickly create some textures, okay, and some good-looking textures. As you guys experienced last week with creating the diffuse texture map for your dumpster, we want to make sure that we're moving through this texturing stage as fast and as cleanly as we can, okay? So there are some ideas in there that we're going to discuss today that will help us efficiently go through the texturing stage. I want you to take a step back for a second and think about a video game that you played recently, preferably recently, okay? Think about all the art assets that you saw in that game, okay? I have yet to play Grand Theft Auto 5. I'm really looking forward to seeing that game and experiencing that world that they have crafted and created. It looks like it's going to be amazing, and I think Grand Theft Auto 5 in many ways is a really fantastic example of the challenge that we as game artists have in front of us, okay? I kind of yearn for the good old days in the 90s when there was only really a couple props in the sets and the environments that we were creating. Now, if you look at these environments and these fantastic scenes that we're participating in during these games, they are incredibly detailed and incredibly dense, okay? There's not just 8 or 9 models in a scene. We have 800 or 900 models, different models within the scene that all come with a series of texture maps that's going to influence how they're drawn on the scene itself. So it's important that we look at some of these texturing strategies and understand how to efficiently go through that process, okay? If I'm a texture artist and I'm assigned 10 models to do, okay, 10 different models, okay? I might have a week to do 10 different models, okay? That means I have to do like 2 a day, 2 entire texture setups a day for 10 different models, okay? So it's important that we work fast and work efficiently through this texturing stage because the volume of work that's in front of us is immense, okay? So it's important that we look at ways and some new strategies to allow us to work through this quickly, okay? So this is where we're going to be focusing a lot of our time today. We're going to be talking about how we can work with our little science fiction, sci-fi wall panel here and create some really compelling work, okay? Again, all the UV mapping for this guy has been done. If you were to examine the UV map for this bad boy, there it is. The UV map is done. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so it should be pretty easy for you to focus on the diffuse texture maps. Okay, geometry, UV mapping, already finished and in the bag for you. Okay. All right. Alrighty, right. To help you guys out today, I've given you some really great resources that I would like to really for you guys to focus on. There's 3 things that you're going to need to download and save. The first one is going to be, of course, the Blacksmith Shop sign, the sci-fi panel. I've given you both of those assets. I've also given you a really great PDF that's important to kind of look through, go through in your library. A lot of the ideas that we're going to be talking about today are going to be replicated in that small little PDF that I've given you. It's the Painting Hard Surfaces PDF. Now, I didn't make this. This has been out in our 3D community for a long time, and it's chocked full of some texturing goodness. So definitely check it out, read it. It's very visual. I think it kind of illustrates the process that professional texture artists are going to have to go through to yield a really high quality result at the end. Okay. In addition, I've also linked, I think, about 9 different videos that are going to talk a lot about, or excuse me, that are going to address a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. So use these as reference. They're phenomenal videos. I made them all to directly address the content that we're going to be exploring in this class today. Okay, so good reference going forward. Okay, all of it's on Photoshop. All of it's on Photoshop. Okay. All right, so everyone kind of understand what we're going to talk about today? All right, let's jump in. Let's hit it. I think I'm going to start by getting everything out of Photoshop and out of Modo and into Photoshop. So we're going to follow our standard export procedures. I think I'm going to focus my attention today on working with our little science fiction panel. Okay. These exercises, both our homework and our lab, are designed to help you build that muscle memory on the entire pipeline from Modo and over into Photoshop. Okay? So what's the first thing that we're going to do? Or let me refine the question a little bit. What do we need to get out of Modo and into Photoshop? UV maps. Got to get those UV maps out. How do we get rid of our UV maps? Or export our UV maps. Excuse me. What else? Export UV. Love it. Perfect. So let's make sure all my pertinent information is selected in my item list. Select my wall tile. I'll select the sci-fi panel UV map from our lists. And then we can go texture, export UVs to EPS. Now I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop. I'm going to call this new folder sci-fi panel. There we go. And let me kind of give you a little secret and a little insight on how I organize my entire project directory, because it's important that we stay organized, and it's also really important that we start filtering specific assets into their own section within our project hierarchy. Okay? We need to be able to get and find very specific assets quickly inside the texturing process. And if we set up our folder structure pretty intelligently initially, we'll be able to filter the information quickly, find what we need, and continue to work quickly. I'm all about not destroying my original images and having collections of assets that I can use over and over and over again in my project. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a folder called Textures, okay? And then inside of Textures, I'm going to create another folder called Assets. Okay, so as you'd imagine, all of the raw source files for this model is going to go in my Assets folder. So that includes the raw UV map, the raw baked images that we generate out of Modo. Okay, it allows us to work quickly and to kind of create a little package, a bundle of assets. What we don't want to have here are project files and image maps all over our hard drive. By having that Assets folder, we have one location for all of our stuff to live in. Makes it easy when we're traveling around here on campus and when we're working with others collaboratively. Okay, so let's just name this. This is going to be UVs, or excuse me, sci-fi panel UV map. There we go. I love it. Name everything, and name everything intelligently. Give it a good description. There we go. So there's my UV map. That's out of there. All right, so that part's done. What's the next series of assets that we need to export from Modo? We don't have any diffuse textures yet. But what do we need to create? Help him out, Seth. Help him out.
Like the surface ID and the alpha output and stuff.
You got it. Surface ID, alpha output, and ambient occlusion. So we're going to bake these three images pretty quickly. Let's do surface ID first, because that's the one that requires a little bit of love over here in our shader tree. Now, I already kind of did you a solid, and I automatically added 3 material groups within our shader tree for the science fiction project. So you should be good to go initially. And I've also added all the render outputs you'll need for this project. Let's just double check and confirm everything here. I'm going to interactively select a view of my surface ID output. There we go. And you can see how I've started to separate out this model into its material groups. Okay. I need to be able to control the little brackets and the little bolts on top of the brackets separately from one another, which is why I separated those elements out using our polygonal groups. All right, so that's pretty great. Let's also just check out alpha output. That's looking pretty good. And of course, ambient occlusion. The ambient occlusion in this particular element is going to be really, really important. And I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. The ambient occlusion map in this particular model is going to be really important for us to get the fine kind of detail that we're after on our project. Okay, that small kind of illusion of dirt and grime is going to go a long, long way to enhance the realism of the texture over there in Photoshop. All right, let's make sure that my entire render system is set to go. I want to make this project file at 2048 by 2048. FYI, here's kind of a cool power user trick. You can actually bake all 3 of these texture maps at the exact same time. You don't have to do them individually. However, saving them becomes a little bit more of a, it's not really a hassle, but it adds a couple more steps into the mix. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I have noticed in my shader tree that all three of my render outputs are visible and on. So you see alpha output, ambient occlusion, and surface ID, they're all active. So, let me just make sure wall tile is selected, my UV map's already selected. So if I do bake to render outputs, check it out. It's going to go ahead and start firing off the render. You can see that my processors there are just kind of chewing through it. On the surface, it seems like it's just doing the surface ID, but it's not. It's actually doing all three at the exact same time. If we wanted to preview this and kind of get some further evidence that it is, in fact, doing all three at the same time, check it out. Up in the top of our render window, we have this output pull-down menu, and I can interactively choose which render output to preview while the computer's rendering. So let me zoom out so we can see what's going on. So for example, if I flip over to ambient occlusion, it's showing me that it's baking the ambient displayed on the screen. It's doing all three of them simultaneously. Okay. At the conclusion of this baking process, we want to make sure that we're exporting these files correctly. Okay. You still have the option to individually images out. However, you also have the ability to create a layered Photoshop document. Pretty cool. That way, all three of these render outputs will be combined and automatically placed in that layered Photoshop document for us. Okay. Huge, huge time saver, especially with complex objects like this. Should we wait? Wait until my little render completes. I feel as though a render song or something that we all can like sing together while we wait for the render. It would have to be about rendering though. Back to like kindergarten where everyone like sang songs about taking naps and things. It's like watching sometimes these renders. Yeah, it's to give you some really great quality. Would it usually be at that size for like actual like video games? So this is kind of going back to the strategy of the texturing phase. We're generating all of our image maps at 2048 by 2048. Higher resolution, really high resolution. By doing all of the authoring of our texture at that high resolution, we gain the ability to shrink down that file to different resolutions quickly. I tend to either do everything at 1K or at 2K because it gives me the most flexibility. I don't want to author my texture, my original Photoshop document, at something that's relatively small, like 512 or even 256 by 256, because if the requirements of that project or of that asset changes, I'm going to have to go retexture this guy at a higher resolution. It's always easier for me to scale down. I always have that option. Scale up is never an option. Okay, so here, just in case something changes, to downscale and hit the ground running. This can at times present some problems because we'll be downscaling all of our pixels, and sometimes it can get a little fuzzy sometimes. But in those situations, it's really easy to resolve those issues since the original Photoshop document and all of its layers are available to us. Okay, so we're finished, ready to go. We can even, now that we're done, we can go and interactively preview the outputs for all of our render outputs. Fantastic, our ambient occlusion map is looking amazing. Okay, so now we need to get it out of Photoshop, or out of Modo, and into a format that Photoshop can work with. Now, up until today, we've been working, and we've been using this Save Image button way down over here, and this is a fantastic way of exporting single frames. But if you were to left-click and hold on that button, you'll find in the popover that we actually have some options. We have Save Image, Save Layered Image, and then it passes as image and passes as layered image. That's something else. That kind of uses the render passes system inside of Modo. So if we use Save Layered Image, now we're going to generate a Photoshop document. And let's be careful with how we're naming it. Of course, it's going to be Sci-Fi Panel. And then I just put a couple little letters here to describe what's in this Photoshop document. So this is the AO pass, this is the alpha pass, and this is the SIR ID. Okay. That way, just from looking at the file name, I can see very quickly what's contained in this original asset. So here's my science fiction. Let's put it in my assets directory, and I'm on my way. It's going to take a beat or so to save the file, because what is physically crafted is a Photoshop document. Okay, they're much larger. Photoshop documents can be quite big. All right, so I'm watching good old Photoshop here. Here we go. And let's start opening up some of those assets that we just generated in Modo. So the first thing that I'm going to do, navigate to my project directory. And mine's just kind of chilling at my desktop here. And believe it or not, I think I'm going to start with the Photoshop document, that layered Photoshop document that I just baked out of Modo. Since 3/4 of all the assets that I need to use for my texture setup stage is encapsulated in this one project file, it's kind of a natural place to start. Okay, it makes it a little bit easier. As you can see over there on the left-hand side, our layers palette contains a layer for each one of those render passes that we just created over in Photoshop, or over in Modo, excuse me. So that's kind of handy. Here's Surface ID. If we deactivate that, we can see the awesomeness. There we go. Check that out. That's a really good AO pass. Butter smooth in all the corners. That's going to give us a nice high-quality result. Awesome. And then, of course, at the bottom of the stack is our alpha output. Okay. Excellent. Excellent, Smithers. Okay, I want to open up my my EPS file. And of course, whenever you open up a raw EPS file, it's going to ask you to do what? Help me out. What is an EPS file? What's its role? What is it? Does anyone know what it is?
It's Illustrator.
Yeah, it's an Illustrator file. It's a vector file, okay? So the first thing that Photoshop's going to want us to do is to rasterize that vector file and get it into a bitmap.
Might be a hard time saving the render to just save as a PSD like all the layers.
So you got to make sure you choose save layered image from the window. Hit cancel for me. So down here. Okay, hit cancel. You did it wrong. Got to click and hold on that button. There you go. Save layered image, and now it's going to generate that Photoshop document for you.
Save layered image, not save passes.
You got it. Save layered image. Right. Okay. So now we can go in and start rasterizing this. Make sure that you change your width and height values here to pixels, and make sure you also put the correct size of the assets that they just baked. In addition, also make sure that your mode is set to RGB, and you're all right. So it's going to rasterize that bad boy. There it is. It looks like there's not a single thing inside of my Photoshop document, but the lines are there. They're just incredibly faint. I need to combine this UV map document with my texture over here on the left. How do I do that? How do I get the layer from this guy into this one? Drag and drop. Now, we want to be careful because it's important that when we drag and drop the layer from one document into another, that they're identical. They're in the exact same place, that they're centered within the document. What do I have to press to do that? The Shift key. Yeah, good job. So if I hold down the Shift key while I drag and drop, here we go. It's automatically going to constrain that image to the center of my open document, and we're ready to go. Now you can actually start to see, with a white background, the outline of our UV map. Okay? The coloring book, if you will, has started to take shape. Now I'm kind of an old school guy. I like to be able to see all the outlines for my UVs. So I'm going to apply a very basic layer style here. I always pick a really bright, vibrant color, like red or purple, just something that's very easy to see. Yeah, there we go. Love it. Very simple. In addition, also personally, I always make the size of my stroke a little bit smaller. At the default value of 3 pixels, kind of takes over a little bit. We just want to see the outlines of our UVs easily. That's it. That's all we're trying to gain here. Now things are starting to look pretty great. I've started to create a complex Photoshop document here. Now here's one of the things that I have seen you guys do over in the lab, and I need to really underscore the importance of this next step. Okay? When we first started this Photoshop document, what did we open? The PSD. And that PSD was the original baked asset that came from Modo, right? The important word in that process is original. Original, okay? It's a raw asset. It's one of our source materials, and we want to make sure that we don't accidentally destroy one of our source assets. We always want to make sure that we're designing our Photoshop documents in a way that is non-destructive, that it doesn't actually harm or give us the potential to harm an original asset. So what am I going to do? No, I'm not going to rename it. I'm going to create a new project file, okay? I'm going to do a save as. Never, ever, ever do save initially. Do a save as. That way you generate a new Photoshop document that's completely disconnected from the original source material. Okay, and this is where I get a little bit more specific with the name of my Photoshop document. I'm going to put TEX in there for texture. Okay, texture. Hello. Texture. And then I'm going to put diff on there for diffuse, because this is going to be the diffuse texture map. All right. Now, I'm not going to put this in my assets folder. I'm going to put it in my textures folder within my project directory. The only thing that's going to go in my assets folder are elements that I'm going to use to create my texture. So all the raw texture files, all those photographs that we're going to download from CG Textures, they're going to go in my assets directory. The assets directory is going to be a bundle, if you will, of every single element that we used to create this file.
What was the resolution?
Well, it's whatever resolution you chose that you baked out of Modo. I think it's 2048 by 2048. All right. So this is an important hierarchy that we're establishing within our project. We're managing our media in a fashion that allows us to work non-destructively. And we're managing our media in a fashion that allows us to very quickly access the assets that we use to create this file. So we have a texture file, and then we have assets, source materials that were used to create that texture. Kind of make sense? All right. That way, if we ever need to go back and make a change, we know exactly where all the source material is. We don't have to dig through 1,000 folders to find that one photograph of a metallic grunge map that we used in our texture. Everything is bundled right there inside the project directory. Okay. Let's just hit save, and we're on our way. Alrighty, right. So now we can start working. Okay. So I like to name things. I want to name this layer over here UV map. And now we're on our way. Okay, so talk me through the next couple steps here. How are we going to use the 3 baked images that we created over in Modo? What are their role inside the larger texturing pipeline? How are we going to use them? How have you guys been using them? Have you been using them? What are the role of the 3 images that we baked out of Modo? How are we going to use them? What else?
Pretty much they're just there for guiding us and helping us pretty much put the exact textures on the part where we want them to be. So pretty much is like when you choose the yellows, when you choose the yellow and the green parts of the UV, the textures that you just baked out of Modo, it only is going to select that one. It's only going to select that one texture.
I love it. Good, good, absolutely. Seth, add on to it.
The ambient occlusion is to help with the shadows.
Yep.
And then the surface ID and alpha passes is for selection.
For selection, yeah. So surface ID and the alpha pass are kind of utility maps. They're really just going to be used to help us generate some pixel perfect selections of the items that we have in our scene. Okay, so let me kind of walk you through the steps that I go through at the beginning of every texture map when I use all 3 of these passes. And after some practice, this is going to turn into muscle memory for you guys. This is a good texture setup phase, and let's cruise through it real quick. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I do is that I use the surface ID map to establish a whole series of masks. Okay. That's why we have this map here, is to very quickly select these portions of my UV map and separate them through a mask in Photoshop. So I deactivated my UV map layer. I'm on my surface ID output layer. And if I grab my good old magic wand and just left click in the yellow section, you can see immediately that Photoshop has gone in and selected the pixels that match the same color value that I clicked on using the magic wand tool. From that selection, I can create a group, a folder if you will. Check it out. You can add that in the bottom right-hand corner of your layers palette. It's this button right here. It's the one that looks like a folder. And check it out. If you already have a selection active inside of Photoshop, it's automatically going to mask that folder. Oops, excuse me, I made a liar. So I made the folder. Now I need to mask it. There we go. So two-part process, right? We create the folder, and then we mask the folder. Why do we mask the folder? You got it. So it masks everything within it, right? We've now created a container that has a border, a defined border that we generated over in Modo. Okay. That way we can just dump anything in the folder and know that the contents of that folder aren't going to, kind of break out of the boundary of that section and bleed into other areas in our map. Okay, like the bolts or the brackets. All of these elements are kind of tightly packed in here, so having this level of accuracy on the mask is really quite critical. Okay, let's do it a couple more times because I got to do this 2 more times. Here's kind of a cool trick. Inside the Magic Wand tool options, if you turn off contiguous, just clicking on that one color will automatically, Photoshop will automatically scan the entire image for that one color and select all of the pixels in that color range. So it kind of makes the process of working with the Magic Wand tool a little bit faster. I can't hear a single thing you're saying, Dylan. Let's take a look. Let's see what we're talking about. Oh, that's kind of what I have.
Okay.
It's almost identical.
Just not like selecting through it. There's no gap.
Aha, I see what you're talking about. Now, did you change the UVs over in Modo at all?
I didn't touch them.
Okay. So I think the issue that Dylan is running into over here is the UV baked border problem. Okay. Remember our conversation last week about UV baked border? How it's going to extend the size of all of our UV islands in the bake stage by 1 or 2 pixels. Okay. A good place to be on the UV baked border preference is either at 1 or at 2. Okay. If you hit it at 0, it's going to be too tight. At a UV baked border size of 1 or 2, you're going to get probably a good result. So go back over into Modo, Dylan. Check out that preference and look what it's at. I think I have mine set to 2. Let me kind of. So where'd you go to open up any of your Modo preferences? Does anyone remember? Yeah, Modo preferences. Okay, and then where we're looking is going to be down here under, where is it? Final rendering. I have mine set to 0 at the moment, but you could definitely put this at 1 or at 2. I wouldn't go higher than a value of 2. This can be a parameter that you have to kind of experiment with to ensure that you're getting the right size. 3, that's what's going on. Put it down to 1. The 1 is a good result. It's going to give you a good result. Okie dokie. All right, so back in Photoshop, let me just create this new folder again. Mask it out. Awesome. Finally, with the magic wand tool, I'll select all the pixels that represent my bolt. Make a new folder, then mask it out. Now, pretty much at this stage, I'm done with my Surface ID pass. It's kind of run its course. It's no longer a useful element for us to keep and continue using in the scene. However, I'm kind of old school. I believe that never get rid of anything inside of Photoshop. It is the master document, but I don't want it kind of dominating and taking up portions of my layers palette. So I'm going to create a new folder, name this one unused, or you can do archive, whatever. I've seen a lot of people do a number of different things, and I'm just going to dump my Surface ID pass in that unused folder. Okay. Alrighty, right. So now that we're starting to establish our system here, let's jump down and talk about the role of alpha output. Alpha output is going to allow us to do what? Yeah, it's going to allow us to get rid of the blackness in the background on what layer? Ambient occlusion. Now, how do I use this alpha output? It's channels. It's channels. Okay? Make sure that your alpha output layer is the only layer that's currently active within the scene. And then when you go over to your channels tab, just hold down the command key and simply left click on any one of those image thumbnails below. The control key. Control key. Now, the cool thing about working in the channels tab is that it's going to go through and analyze the value of all the pixels that are currently visible in the screen. And when I say value, I mean their brightness, okay? Their brightness. So it's going to analyze the black pixels and the white pixels, and it's automatically going to select those pixels based on their values, okay? Right now, all the white pixels have a value of 100%, so they have a 100% transparency selection here in good old Photoshop, okay? So we need to use this selection as the part of the core of our network here. I'm going to use it for my ambient occlusion pass. Let's just turn it on. I want to use it to mask out the background, and there it is. That's the only real application of the alpha output. Allows us to just quickly, within 1 or 2 clicks, get the result that we need. Now, it seems like it's a really kind of a silly pass to use in this particular project file, but when you're working with more complex networks and more complex UV maps and texture maps, it's nice to have one image that will allow you to select everything in 1 click. I did, yeah. So I masked out. We need to get rid of the black background on my ambient occlusion pass. That's kind of what we're using the alpha output to do. Okay. So I'm done with my alpha output. I'm going to put that in the unused folder. And yeah, sure, of course. Let me go back in time. All right. So one of the things that you have to really be mindful of, and this is kind of a landmine that people often step on, is that you have to have the alpha output has to be the only layer visible in the scene. Okay? In order for this to work, you have to solo that layer. Once that's done, go to the Channels tab, right next to your Layers tab, and then just hold down your Command key and then single left click on any one of these image thumbnails. Okay? And you can see on my screen that it's automatically going to select the outlines of each one of those UV islands. I'm going to use that selection as a mask on good old ambient occlusion. So we'll just click on the Add Layer Mask button, and we're on our way. Okay. All right. I want to take my ambient occlusion layer, and I'm going to put it right smack dab at the top of my layer stack. Ambient occlusion is always going to be on top, but since we haven't messed around with the blend mode on our ambient occlusion map, anything that we do below it inside the layers palette is going to be unseen. So what do I need to change on my ambient occlusion map in order to allow us to continue to participate in this layering process? The blend mode. Multiply. Yeah, we need to change the blend mode for this layer to multiply. Now, in doing that, what do we get? I can't hear a single thing you're saying, Dylan.
Oh, it applies the darker pixels to the layers beneath it.
You got it. And really, kind of here's an easier way of consuming what we're doing here. It's going to make all the white areas on this layer transparent. Okay, so we're going to keep all the dark pixels, and we're going to get rid of all the white pixels. Since all of our lovely shadow and grime detail is relatively dark, it's going to allow us to get this illusion pretty quickly. To illustrate what's going on, let's produce some content inside of group number 1. I have group number 1 selected, and I'm just going to add a solid color into the mix. Just make it red. There we go. It's in there. Let's turn group 1 on. And then I can change the blend mode for my ambient occlusion to multiply. And there we go. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So the red pixels in there are being driven by a solid color layer that was automatically placed inside of group number 1. Okay. If you want, one of the things that you could do is to very quickly go in, and I'm going to name all of my groups. We'll just call this base, group 2 are the brackets, group 3 are the rivets, and we're on our way. Or the bolts, whatever you want to call them. They're more like bolts than rivets. Let's be representative of that idea. Okay, yeah.
Can you repeat that again?
Repeat what?
How you got it to red again?
Yeah, so inside of my base folder, I just added just a solid color. That's it, a red solid color. That's it.
Excuse me, what if you did, you just made different layers in it to make the
Make them into groups. Put them in groups, because we're going to be placing a lot of different photographs in these folders. And I don't want to mask each one of them separately. I want to have one hierarchical mask on the group that's going to influence all of the children of that group. Do this. This is one of those power user tricks that will make your life easier as a texture artist. It really will. Okay. In addition, we also now have a group that can control the visibility of large sections of our object, okay? So we can very quickly turn parts of our texture on and off, okay? Focus our brain and our creativity on just certain areas. Yeah?
My Photoshop is wrong, something wrong, because
Okay.
I can't go to the color mode. And this is really bugging me.
All right, so what are we trying to do here? That's the
Because,
paint bucket.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to paint, but showing
It's only
this,
gray.
yeah, so I checked out the image
Mm-hmm.
and RGB.
RGB.
So
Interesting.
something wrong.
It's something I would agree with you. I would agree with you. I can see it. Okay. What's going on here is that you have your layer mask selected. See the little white? Yeah. Did you see the little white corners around your layer mask? Click on it.
This one?
Yeah. When you're working with a layer mask, it's only going to give you grayscale values, which is why you weren't able to paint with red. Click on the folder,
Oh, okay.
and now you'll be able to go in and choose any color you want. There's white. Go. And there we go. Now we're back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I added a solid color layer. This button, the yin and yang sign, and then at the top of that list, you'll be able to add a solid color layer. All right. So I'm just going to do that solid color layer thing on all 3 of my groups.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, I selected the folder, and now so it won't let me, put the color.
Okay, hold on 2 seconds. Let me just finish my thought here. I'll give you a hand for sure. Okay. So that's as far as I've gotten. All right, let's see what we got.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, you're doing well. Let's see what
It's like I'm trying to.
paint bucket. No, so what I was doing, I wasn't using the paint bucket tool. I was adding a solid color. That one. And then top of the list, solid color.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. This gives you more flexibility, a lot more flexibility, because now we have a layer that's flooding the entire document with a color, and then we get to control where that color goes by the layer mask. Okay? A lot of people overlook the power of solid color layers. I think it's the best thing to use when throwing down colors in our textures, because we get to control the color and we get to control where that color goes with a mask.
Yeah, for some reason, when I'm filling the color in, filling the outside of the mask, like this.
Okay, hit OK. Well, right now, that makes sense. Group 1 isn't masked. No. Okay, I like what you're doing. I get it. I get what you're doing. But we want to apply the mask to the folder. Let me show you a trick. Hold down the Command key. Okay, now click on that layer mask. See how it selects it? Okay, now click on your folder. Here we go. Now, apply your selection as a mask to your folder. Yes. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. Now we're not seeing anything because of our ambient occlusion map. Go to your ambient occlusion, and we didn't change the blend mode.
Okay. So where would that be at?
And see where it says normal?
Okay.
And then blend mode goes to multiply. Yes. Now we see the red.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I'm having thing I need to make the element work.
Okay, solo that layer. Turn everything else off.
What's the shortcut for that?
Hold down the Alt key, the Option key.
That's what it was.
Yeah. Now, looks like someone's changed your interface ever so slightly. It's probably in there, but let's do this. Let's go Window and Workspace, and then Reset Essentials.
Okay.
There we go. There's channels.
There you go. It was command.
Excellent. How you liking copy, Rebecca? It's good? How do you like it?
Oh, yeah.
You like it?
I like it a lot.
Yes.
Showing any.
Okay, let's
So,
see what's going on.
Let me guess. This is. Do I have to?
Nope, leave that where it is. I bet you anything, it's your ambient occlusion map. Did you change the blend mode of your ambient occlusion map?
No, I'm not.
Let's do that real fast. Ambient occlusion. Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. And then normal, that's the blend mode. Change it to multiply. There it is. Yep. That ambient occlusion map thing is going to get people the first couple times, okay? Because if you don't change the blend mode, it's just going to cover up anything that's below it.
Oh, I see.
Okay. All right. So believe it or not, we're at the moment where we actually can begin to start painting something. We can go through a lot of setup just to get us to the point where we can start doing some work. I want to change the color of my UV outlines real fast, just by editing my layer style. Let's go into stroke. To be honest with you, I almost never use red. I'm a bright purple kind of guy. But you can use whatever color you want. Just make it easy for your brain to consume it and see it. That's it. With the bright purple, very few things in my life are bright purple. So it's a natural color for my texturing pipeline. Okay. So things are starting to look pretty good here. Everything is getting kind of dialed. Now we want to start looking at the process of establishing that texture, that layer network that we went through last week. Last week we talked a lot about the role and the idea of taking a whole bunch of photographs and recreating the physical layers of this object, right? Help me out. What did we talk about? Where did we start first? Where did we start? When we were working with the dumpster, what was the first thing that you explored and flushed out? The steel, like the underlying base metal first, right? Because in actuality, everything that we create in the real world is going to be generated from a raw material, and then finishes are going to be applied on top of that. Okay, so we're going to start with an image that defines the base raw metal. I've downloaded some images from CG Textures that really illustrate some good fun stuff here. So I'm going to go to my texture library, and here's kind of a great illustration of something that you may want to start working with in your own life, okay? I download a lot of textures from CG Textures, a lot of them actually, and what you see on the screen here is my kind of master library of all of my textures, and to be honest with you, this is only a portion. These are only the favorites. On my home workstation, I have, I think, a couple gigabytes of photographs that I've downloaded across my career. So keep those files. Keep them on your thumb drive. That way, you don't always have to go back to CG Textures and find the resources that you want to use for your project. And then organize it. Don't just dump it in a folder. Organize it into a whole series of subfolders. Go ahead, Austin. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me. Most of the game companies are going to have very, very, very strong restrictions as to what can be included in your game. Great example, Blizzard, right? Blizzard has a corporate policy of no photographs in their texture files. They want all of their texture artists to hand paint everything. And they're really, really good at it. The quality of work that you see in those textures can be a number of things. If you look at some of the StarCraft stuff, photoreal, okay? Obviously, you go into like Diablo 3, it's definitely stylized. The art direction was very, very different. But the reason why they kind of have a blanket rule as to no photographs is that they don't want to have an individual claiming a portion of that game, okay? So for example, maybe I'm making a texture for one of the props that's going in World of Warcraft, and I use a picture of, I don't know, a wood grain pattern that I found somewhere in my life as part of the base texture map for that game, right? Or for that game asset. Well, I've now used my personal property, the photograph, as part of the work product for a massive game, right? I could go back to Blizzard and say, hey, actually I own something in that game. That photograph that I took, I own that photograph, that's my photograph. You're making money off of my photograph, okay? You gotta give me something. I want a little dinero on that one. You need to throw me a little bit of a royalty to if you want to keep using that texture in your game, okay? Now, so they've completely sidestepped that entire, any game artist giving, that opportunity for any game artist to claim a certain portion of the profits of that game by saying you're only allowed to paint your textures, you're only allowed to make the textures using the tools that we give you, so you're going to work on our machines with our software, in our building, with our electricity, and our, everything belongs to Blizzard, so that when they release that game and make $1 zillion, there's no chance that anyone can claim a portion of that game's profits. So that's why. That's why.
For any other game companies, do they use photographs?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do they take the pictures themselves?
A lot of times they take the pictures themselves, just to make sure that they own everything that was used to make that game. That's it. That's it. Being able to say beyond any reasonable doubt, if someone makes a claim that the work product that was used to create that art asset belongs to you is an important element. You often, however, can find royalty-free image libraries that you can use in your game. Like there's a really great website called 3D Total that sells textures for free, and you can buy big collections of them.
You said sell textures for free.
Not for free. You can sell textures. I think they do have a couple free ones, and then they're royalty free. They can sell royalty free textures. That's what I was trying to say. And then under the royalty free license, you can use that texture in any capacity that you want. It's called 3D Total. You can find them all over the place. There's a bazillion companies out there that sell royalty free textures, so you can buy some. Yeah, there's some good ones. 3D Total has some really nice textures, and they actually give you the bump, displacement, normal, spec maps. They give you all the different type of image maps that you would require to recreate that material. All right, for us, we're just going to use the free stuff that we find online. In here, we're not going to make any money off of these things. We're not going to be we're not going to be selling these things, so I think we'll be okay. All right. So I'm going to go and kind of do some searching for some textures here that will allow me to very quickly flush out what I believe I want my underlying core metal base material to look like. And I like to find core base materials that have a little character to it. I don't like to have things just be pure metallic, because we still want to have some lovely character moments in the texture that make it look dimensional, that make it look aged and beat up and used. Okay? So I'm going to use this guy. open it up in Photoshop. And I want to start dragging and dropping all of these assets into my Photoshop texture. There we go. There we go, lovely. Let's put it in the base folder so it's automatically masked out. And I think I'm also going to make that texture file a little bit smaller just by doing a slight free transformation here. There we go. I like to have it a little bit smaller because now the features of the texture are more closely scaled to the size of the actual sci-fi panel. You have to look critically at the content of the texture and the content of the photograph that you're putting into your final texture map. We need all these lovely little details in here to match the size, scale, and proportion of the object that we're putting them on. Otherwise, it's just going to look weird. Okay, so that's a good start. That's a really good start. And this texture is starting to come to life a little bit. Now we want to go in and add that paint layer. How do we add that paint layer into the mix? Add the base metal. Now we want to add the paint layer. I showed you a great technique last week that allowed you to very quickly create that paint layer. What was it? What tool did we use in Photoshop? Don't remember. Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? I'm trying to add the paint layer now. So we have the metal layer. Now we have the paint layer, right? Because we want this to be a painted science fiction panel, right? We're trying to recreate the natural layers on this object as if it was chilling out here in the real world. A dumpster is a great example last week. That's a steel dumpster, but they painted it green, right? We need to have a layer that makes it green. Solid color. And then what? We masked it, right? Now, all solid colors come with a mask initially, okay? So we don't need to mask it. So here's mine. I'm going to have my guy be red. So it's a solid color, and then whenever you create a solid color, it's going to flood the entire layer with red, right? How are we going to modulate it? How are we going to determine, I don't want red to be everywhere. I only want red to be in a couple places here. How are we going to control this? Change the opacity, but that's just going to make it like pink. Think about it. What's the role of a mask? What does it do? What does that mask do? It turns pixels on and off, right? So what if we went in with like some painting tools and interactively turned portions of my solid color layer on and off? Last week I showed you how to work with the paint bucket tool. It's my favorite way to very quickly go in and generate some images or the illusion of paint. Now I'm going to invert my layer mask on my paint layer here, Command-I, which basically just turns off all the pixels on that layer. I always like to start like this because it allows me to use the paint bucket tool a little bit more creatively. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to go find my paint bucket tool. It's buried in the gradient tool at the moment. There it is. Here's the paint bucket tool. Keyboard shortcut G. G is in golf. And now I'm going to paint with white. The most important thing that we need to have active inside of our Photoshop tool options is this check mark for all layers. That way it's going to analyze the pixel value of all the layers that we click on as we interactively use the paint bucket tool. All right, so I got my layer mask active. So check it out. Now when I start clicking on my paint bucket tool, it's automatically going in and analyzing the color value of the pixels that I'm clicking on, and it's flooding just those pixels in the image, okay? And the illusion that we're getting here is the illusion that we have a paint layer that's been eroded away, that's been chipped and scratched and beat up over time. And this is looking pretty cool. I'm digging it. So I'm just going to continue going in and using the paint bucket tool here to very quickly just kind of throw down some colors. And what we get is a truly organic result in this process. We don't want to have to do this by hand. There's a lot of detail in here that, would be traditionally very difficult to paint by hand. Also, look critically at the texture that you're creating. You want to have, part of your paint layer look as though it's been eroded, but you don't want everything to be eroded. You still want to have some areas, like down at the bottom here, look generally okay. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, say again? How do we add a solid color layer into the mix? Where do we go inside of our little interface? The bottom. It's a layer palette operation. It's the yin and the yang symbol, okay? It's at the top of your list. Photoshop freeze? Oh no. Save and save often. Actually, I'm going to save mine right now. Save. There we go. Save and save often. You don't want to lose all this lovely work. Okay. So now what we're starting to craft here is the illusion, excuse me, the illusion that we have multiple layers influencing the final quality and the final color of our object here. And things are starting to look pretty amazing. I'm liking this. I'm liking this a lot, actually. One of the elements that we use almost exclusively, or one of the reasons why we work almost exclusively in Photoshop for this process, is that it allows us to add layers on top of each other over and over and over again. Okay, it's a big quality benefit of working in Photoshop. I want to add layers of information to create the illusion that I'm after. If you look carefully at my paint layer, does it look very real? We're getting there, kind of, but what's missing? Shadows. It's also missing information on the inside of the paint, right? We need some variation in value in here, okay? So we need to modulate its tonal value pretty significantly to continue to achieve the illusion that we're after. When you're painting diffuse texture maps, it's not about one layer that's going to achieve the look of your object. It's about 10 or 15 layers all built on top of each other. All right, I'm just going to go in and do something perhaps like that. I love it. Okay, now we're looking pretty good. Nice and organic. So let's go ahead and start adding some additional photographs into the mix to break up the red, because there's a lot of red in there, and we want to have some different values in there to make it look as though the red has been weathered a little bit, that the paint has in fact been influenced by its surrounding. I'm going to go back into my image library, and I'm going to try to find another texture. And let's see if I can find something that's kind of compelling. These scratch layers are pretty neat. Yeah, I want to grab that scratch layer, bring it into Photoshop, combine it into my original image here. There we go. I want to scale this bad boy down. Yeah, there we go. And of course, I need to have two of them. Let me duplicate them. Duplicate that layer, and then using the Move tool, I want to take that duplicate and just bring them down a little bit. All right, rock and roll. I can select both of those layers and hit Command E, which is going to merge those two layers into one. That way, I have complete coverage of all of my scratches across the surface of my guy. In the current layer order, however, we're completely covering up the awesomeness of my red paint layer. So what do I need to do? You could move it below, but then we're not going to see it at all, right? We want to use the scratch layer here to kind of break up the paint values a little bit, to make it look as though the paint has been dinged and scratched, but not to a point where the paint has been chipped away. Blend mode, you got it, because we want to start blending these two layers together. So with my little scratch layer here selected, I can go up into my blend mode layer. Let's just see what happens when I do overlay. Nothing. Let's do multiply. So you're going to have to kind of experiment to a certain degree. So there we go. Now we're breaking it up. I think multiply may be a little too dark here. So let's just kind of experiment. Whoa, that's intense. Lightens way too much. Screen's interesting, but now our thing has gone pink. Add is too much. Hard light's kind of neat. Okay, I like hard light because now we're starting to get some of that original red color back, but it's just way too intense, I think. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to lower the opacity of that layer a little bit and continue to adjust its effect on this on my scene. Yeah, that's not so bad. I just lowered it to a value of 60%. And look at the paint now. On my screen, we now have the illusion that there are certain details or certain weathering effects on top of the paint that haven't chipped through. Because, all paint has a thickness associated with it, right? So we have some details, some scratches that are just on the surface of the paint. And then there's some areas like over in here and over in here where it's been weathered to a point where it's completely removed the paint from the surface of my little science fiction panel. Okay. Now we're getting something that looks a little bit more compelling, that looks a little bit more real than what we had before. I like it. I like it a lot. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. Okay, let's revisit this again. Let's do it on another part of our layer here. I want to do it on the brackets. Okay, I have this green. There we go. I got this green going on my brackets. All right. I'm going to recycle. Let's see. I'm going to recycle that image right there. I'm going to make a copy of it. I want to use that copy in my brackets. Put it in there. Put it up top so we can see it. And then I'll move it where I need it to go. Yes, that's delicious. Awesome. Okay, and let's do this. I want to make a copy of that layer. I want to move the copy so that it's being used over here. And then I'm just going to combine both those layers into one. Okay. All right. So we have our base metallic layer for our brackets already established, right? I need to go in and use the paint bucket tool to start to fill in to create that paint layer. We have the metal layer done. Now we need to create the paint layer, okay? I want to use the color green. So I want to put this green solid color on top, turn it on, and it completely turns off or completely occludes all of that lovely metal detail, right? So here's how we use that paint bucket tool, Dylan, okay? Initially, I'm going to invert my layer mask on my solid layer, okay? Now I can go grab my paint bucket, turn on, and ensure that all layers is active. That way it's going to analyze every single layer that I click on, okay? Say again? Command I. Just make sure that the image mask is selected and not the layer. All right, now I can grab my paint bucket. I'm going to paint with white, and I'm just going to start clicking. And you can see that it's analyzing the value, the brightness value of the pixels that I'm clicking on, and it's only flooding those pixels based on their value. Kind of gives me an organic result. Did you turn on all layers? All right, let's see what we got, Dylan. Did it work for you?
So here's where I'm at.
No, you didn't turn on all layers.
I thought you meant turn the visibility of all the layers.
Yeah. All right. See you later. I'll tell you what, let's take a break. Let's take a break. Yeah. Let me put up my little break time video. Been yakking for a bit. Let's take a break. All right. Let me help Waddell and then come give you a hand, okay? Okie dokie. Let's get back to it, folks. All right. So before we left, we were just kind of wrapping up the foundation of getting all these things hooked together. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about or reviewing a lot of the elements that we discussed last week, because I want to explore some new ideas. Okay. One of the great things about working with solid color layers is that they give us the flexibility to change the basic, the basic paint color of our objects, if you will, quickly without having to go back in and redo any work. This is the advantage, and this is truly why we want to use solid color layers in conjunction with layer masks, is that I could very quickly go in and change this, and everything updates on the fly for us. When you paint with value, so when you paint with shades of gray, you can change the base color of that object and not have to redo any of your work, okay? Looking amazing still. Looking amazing still on this kind of yellowy orange thing, all right? Clearly I don't want to have the brackets for my little guy be fluorescent green, so double clicking on the solid color swatch will allow me to go in and maybe pick kind of like a nice darker green, kind of a military green, okay? Works really well. One final thing that, yeah, go ahead.
Did you make another layer mask before you started painting so it wouldn't affect the metal circle in the middle?
No, I was just very careful as to which pixels I selected. But you could if you wanted to. Okay. And remember, if you don't have, if you want to get rid of the paint in some areas and keep it in others, you're working with a layer mask. So you could go back in on that layer mask and just paint black and remove paint, remove the illusion of that paint layer. It's an incredibly flexible system. When we paint with those multitude of colors, we get a really nice illusion. The last thing that I want to just kind of use as a review for last week is to create that little rust layer. I'm a big fan of that rust layer. I think it adds a tremendous amount of realism pretty instantly. If you look carefully inside of my texture map here, we have this really awesome illusion of these scratches and these chips in our paint, but we don't really have the illusion that there's any sort of thickness on the paint itself. And paint is pretty thick. Even when you spray paint something on there, you're always going to increase the overall thickness of that layer. So check it out. I want to have a little rust layer here, or at the very least a layer that defines a little bit of height for my paint layer. And here is another reason why I love working with these solid color layers, is that we can go in and we can select all the pixels that we use to create that effect. So even here inside of our layers palette, we can just hold down the command key and click on the image mat, okay, on the thumbnail, and you can see that it's automatically selected the outlines of that entire layer. If I invert that selection, or actually, I'm not going to invert it, excuse me, I want to grow it, modify, let's do expand, let's just do by 2 pixels, there we go. Now I can use that selection as the genesis for another mask. It's under the select pull-down menu. Modify, you got expand, contract, feather. Now you got to be careful with this, all right? But it can give you a pretty cool result. Just a couple pixels. Use your eyeballs. Okay, and by changing the layer order, you can see that now we have a yellow paint layer and then a very small little red border around that yellow paint layer. Now you can do a lot with that paint layer. You can obviously use it to create this small illusion of rust, which is kind of red or orangey. There we go. You can use it to give you a different value within that texture. Yeah, go ahead. No, I didn't. This one right here. This one. Let's do it again. So I used this layer mask as the genesis of my selection because I want to fill in. I want to have a little small, like 1 or 2 pixel border around all of those openings. So if I hold down the command key and click, it automatically selects all those openings. Now I'm going to modify my selection, expand it by 1 or 2 pixels. Let's do 2 pixels. Ooh, now I'm growing it a little bit. And now, with that selection, if I create my solid color layer, that solid color layer will automatically be masked out by that selection. And then I just changed the layer order so that it was underneath. Oops, like that. So if you think about the system that we created here, we have paint, we have rust, we have metal. Okay? We're starting at the top. So here's, actually we have scratches for the paint, the actual paint layer, the rust for the paint, and the underlying metal texture. Why don't you just double click on it, see what happens. All right. So that's kind of where we ended up last week, and this is starting to look really, really, really good. I'm digging it. I'm digging it a lot. I might actually do a levels call on this guy. Make that underlying base material just a little darker. Make it kind of contrasty. A little too contrasty. There we go. Looking good. And then we can just go in and change all these values at any time and rock and roll. I mean, this is the power of this entire system, is that we can go in and art direct after the fact and not have to go back in and redo any of our work. I love it. Cool. Pretty neat. Digging it. Digging it in DDO. All right, pretty great. Okay, so let's start talking about what we need to do to continue adding detail in this, because this is kind of as far as we went last week. But in order for us to really get the detail that we need to go in and start customizing some scratches, right? I wanted to go in and create the illusion that certain portions of this entire object have been scratched so much, okay, that we've been gouging certain areas that it's going into the metal at a much deeper level. So I want to create the illusion that we're now scratching and influencing that core base metallic, that core base metal layer, okay? So we're not, this is going to go all the way down into like the core of the metal, underlying metal for this object. Now I want to be able to go in and do this by hand because I don't want it to go everywhere. Some people would call this the highlighting phase, and I think that's a nice idea to look at. We want to create some highlights on the metallic side to create brighter areas in the middle. Okay. In essence, what we want to be able to go and do here is paint with some silver. I use this all the time, and it's a really, really neat thing for us to do quickly. Okay, check it out. I'm going to create a new solid color layer. And I'll just leave it as a red for the time being. Let's just get it into our base here. And it's going to go on the very, very tippy top. And clearly I don't want it to flood everything, so I'm just going to turn it off. Okay. I want to be able to go in with my brush system and start to customize the way this looks. Photoshop has an extraordinarily, and I mean extraordinarily powerful brush system that's going to allow us to go in and very quickly detail out our mesh with some really unique images. This is what I'm talking about. Okay, so check it out. I've just activated the brush tool, and you can find that over here in your Photoshop toolbar. It's right beneath the Band-Aids. There's the brush tool. Okay, this is what we don't want to do. Okay, now I'm using a graphics tablet. This is what we don't want to do. Does that look organic and real? No, horrible, this is bad. We don't like this, okay? Using the standard Photoshop brushes are never, ever, ever going to yield us the result that we're after. Even if we try to change its color to maybe like a lighter silver, this is kind of where we're going, okay? But it still looks horrible, right? It still looks horrible. It's always, always, always going to look like someone's taken a magic marker to our image and kind of drawn all over it. I want to create weathering effects. I want this to look as though it's been influenced by the environment that it's currently chilling in. So right now, that's bad. That's a horrible, horrible effect. I want to fill my layer mask with black just to get rid of everything. And now we're back. So what we want to use is the very powerful Photoshop brush system to give us some organic results. Brushes inside of Photoshop are pretty cool. Okay, we get to control how they look and how they behave by going over to these two options in our toolbar. Okay, if we click on it, go. We have two different sections here. Okay, we have our brushes, And then we have our brush presets, okay? And that's this one down here. These brush presets are a really great place for us to start because as you can see from the thumbnail, we can generate or we can use some of these brushes to yield a more organic result, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about. I don't know why you'd want to do this, but you can paint grass in Photoshop. I'm going to create a new layer just so I don't screw up what I have. Yeah, so you can paint, it's not grass. I didn't select it. There we go. So I can paint grass if I wanted to. Woo! I don't know why you'd want to paint grass, but you can. You know, some of the presets in here are pretty useful. That one is not. I don't know why you'd want to use leaves, but you know, it's an option for us, which is pretty great. So we want to extend this system to use some really cool brushes. So you don't see this toolbar over here? Okay, so if you can't see, if you don't have this toolbar in your essentials, okay, you're in a different version of Photoshop than I am. So here's where you want to go. You want to go Window, and you want to make sure that Brush and Brush Presets are on. Okay, so Window, Brush, Brush Presets. Okay, that should get you those little palettes. All right, so the grass and the leaves, stupid, we're never going to use them. So let's look at what we can use. Out there in the interweb, if you were to go out, the internet, if you were to go out and search the web for grungy brush presets, Photoshop brushes, you will find a boatload of them. I actually gave you a couple last week on renderography. I was trying to get to talk about brushes last week, but we ran out of time. So if we go back in time 1 week to this painting in Photoshop, the resources section, I gave you a couple different things. I gave you a couple grunge textures, but I also gave you a couple Photoshop brushes. So if you were to download both of those, let's check them out. I just saved them to my desktop. So here they are. Here's the grunge brush. Let's unarchive it. And what you're going to get is a file that ends with ABR. Okay, Adobe Brush. That's what it stands for. Okay. We can load this brush into Photoshop and use these new brushes as part of our textures. So let's go back into Photoshop, and I want to open up, oh no, okay, let's go back into my Photoshop document here, and if I go back into my brush preset library, it's kind of hard, and this is definitely a fault of Adobe. In order for us to load those brushes, we have to go into this Panel Options pull-down menu in the upper right-hand corner of our brush presets library. Inside this popover, you can see that we have some options, one of which is load brushes. So I want to load in my brush. It's going to bring open a standard Finder window here. I saved mine to my desktop, and there it is, grunge brush. And when we hit open, all those brushes will be at the bottom of your brush preset library. And there's some good ones in here. Play around with them. Let me create a new library. I always kind of see, yes, see, this is what I'm talking about. Check it out. Now we can go in and interactively place like splats and stuff on our image. We're not relying on the paint bucket or an underlying texture to create this detail. This is something that I'm now generating from these brushes, and I'm controlling how it's going to work. And look at that. I mean, that's pretty cool. If you look carefully at the edges that I'm creating, yeah, that's rad. That's very cool. That entire effect generated from a brush. Brushes are amazing. Experiment around with some of them. You'll get some good results. Please keep in mind that you'll have to continue to modulate the size of the brush to give you the result that you want. Question? Okay, so, and this is the hitch. This is kind of the problem that a lot of people run into. To load in a brush, that ABR file that you downloaded from the web, go to this button inside the brush preset library. You're going to get a little flyout menu. Inside this flyout menu, kind of towards the middle, is load brushes. And then just navigate to where you save that file on your computer and select it. Once you select it, all of those brushes are going to pop in at the bottom of your brush library. And explore it. The ones that I've given you are pretty cool looking. They are based entirely off of photographs, and you can get some really cool organic results. So it's not what? Do you have your brush tool active?
Do I have to save it as a set?
No, 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 no. Okay.
So in here, I have one of the brushes selected. Done.
Uh-huh.
And then that.
Okay. All right. Let's go into our brush preset library and select it from here.
It's like 2,500-ish. Never mind. There it is.
Yep.
Cool.
So use these brushes across your entire texturing workflow. I think you're going to find that the result is going to be worth the small effort into getting these things in. Say again? No, I got these off the web. They're free, royalty free. If you wanted to make your own brushes, I'll let you explore how to do that. Basically, there are photographs. It's pretty easy to create your own brushes inside of Photoshop. You just have to start with the high resolution photograph that's black and white, and then you can very quickly create a brush just by going, I think, image or edit, and then define brush or something like that. I very rarely do it because I have a lot of brushes that I've downloaded from the web that I use in my texturing work. Okay. So there's a couple things in here. Let me find a good one. All right. I'm working on just a throwaway layer here, because I want to find a brush that will give me the illusion of little scratches and dents and nicks and what have you. So this is going to be a process of experimentation. Okay. Ooh, that one's humongous. Remember, change your brush sizes. A lot of these things are just ginormous in size. Okay. All right. This file here gives me an opportunity to talk about how we can work with brushes to yield a more organic result. Check this out. Okay, so I have this brush. That's a horrible one. Let me find a fun one. Looks like I'm painting blood, so let me change my color because that's driving me crazy. Yeah. Okay, this is kind of a cool one. Let's look at the one right above it. That's a good one. This is kind of a cool one. All right. This might be something I could use for the work that I'm going to be performing here momentarily. But I want to be able to left click and drag. You know, as I left click and drag, you can see that the tool is repeating and stamping down this brush pattern a little too uniformly. Okay. It looks like it's just kind of a stamp. It's going stamp, 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 and it's a pretty uniform pattern. Well, what if I wanted to change the pattern? What if I want certain stamps of the brush to be larger or smaller, or a different opacity level, or a different maybe I wanted to have it rotate ever so slightly? We always want to try to generate organic results when we're using these Photoshop brushes. Okay, check it out. If you go into the other part of your interface, this part, so this guy right here, you're going to be able to go in and change what are called the brush dynamics. The first thing you got to do is enable a number of these rules. So if I turn on shape dynamics and then select its option, check it out. I now can change the size of my stamp. Okay, so maybe every time it repeats the pattern, it changes the size of that pattern ever so slightly. Yeah, check it out. Now certain ones are small, certain ones are big. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Okay. Certain ones are small, certain ones are big. Excellent. We can also change the angle. You get a cool little preview down there at the bottom. So now it's going to randomly rotate the brush head so you're not getting the same result every single time. You can also change the roundness. This is kind of choking it a little bit, compressing the image. I love it. Good times. Good times. You can actually flip some of these values, continue to yield some different results. Okay. You can also do scattering. Scattering is kind of fun. Yeah, let me start over again here. Now it's just going to scatter. It's like the nozzle of your paintbrush has just been widened out and is blasting this in a lot of different areas. Okay. Other ones that I like to do, they actually have some new ones in here. The wet edges is kind of fun. In certain effects, that can give you a really cool, yeah, now I'm getting certain levels of opacity, which is kind of cool. Check this action out. I want to change my shape dynamics. I don't need the, keep the size jitter going, but the angle jitter kind of keep the same. Yeah, now I'm getting different values in there. You can also do opacity. Where's opacity? Color dynamics. Brightness jitter, let's do that. Yeah. Now it's kind of going purple, so that's not what I wanted. Let's do saturation jitter. Yeah, that's kind of cool. We're just adding variation in here, and that's really what we're after. Yeah. It's it's a weird, the way Photoshop works with it, it's kind of strange. If you hit Command Z, you'll go back in time one step. If you want to do step backwards, which is kind of the traditional undo, I think it's right there. Step backwards, so it's what, Command Control Z? I think that's Command Control Z. Let's try it out. Command Option Z. I almost never do it. Yeah, Command Option Z. Yeah, it's one step, and then if you hit it again, it's going to redo that step. So it's kind of like a toggle. All right. So work with these brushes, guys. It's absolutely going to give you a very strong result quickly. We want to infuse this level of organic detail into the surface of our textures. One thing that I would like to recommend and remind you guys of when you're using these things in here, so I've just painted that kind of blue section, okay? What we can do is that we can often just use these paint brushes to go back in and then remove sections. So keep in mind, it's an additive process, but it's also a subtractive process. Maybe I want to have certain sections of this blue field look as though it's been chipped away. Well, we can just. I'm not working on a layer mask here. I'll tell you what. Let me really illustrate the process. I'll add in a solid color layer mask that's bright blue. There we go. I'll invert it, and then I'll throw down. There we go. It's kind of, I like this one. Kind of gives you a lot of texture in there. But what if I wanted to break it up? Well, if you paint with black, so I've just changed my foreground color to black, and then I can choose another brush. Yeah, I can remove parts of that blue field that I just put down. You're in the driver's seat. This is the power of working with masks, is that we can interactively turn things on and off with both the paint bucket tool and brushes and other things, okay? We get to put organic detail where we want it to go, okay? Just using brushes. Just using brushes, okay? Let me show you the next step in this. We started talking about how to create this highlighting effect by creating the illusion of very deep, dark scratches. I'm going to go and find a couple brushes here. Let me grab my brushes here, go into my brush preset library. Let's find a brush that will work. Yeah, that's a good one. But it's definitely way too big. Yeah, so the command stroke is the braces key. The braces key. Or the bracket key. It's the key that looks like, it's the one next to the P key on your keyboard. Those two are going to increase and decrease the size of your brush. Okay, so if I start to throw down some tape, yeah, that's horrible. Horrible, horrible. So that's not it. Let me go back in time a couple steps. Let's find another one here. This is kind of an interesting one. It's compelling. Don't like the way it's coming out, though. One thing that you can do, and I've seen people do this a lot, is that you can use like a hard edge brush. Kind of something like this, kind of block out where you want some of these scratches to go. Just very quickly, just kind of block out the form. You can even use some of your more traditional brushes to do this. I want to do it just to kind of go through this process quickly. And I'm just kind of being loosey-goosey here. Just trying to stay angular. Trying really hard to make all of these shapes feel and look just a little bit different from each other. I'm kind of doing some of this by hand. Okay. We have a big chunk gone down over there. I'm also trying to consider where the natural weathering would happen on this object. The corners are natural because that's there's going to be chips and scratches on the corners where it was kind of worn out a little bit.
So are you going to then go back and take away from this?
Yep, you got it. So I'm just blocking out where I want to have all of these deep, dark scratches in here. And then I can go back in with some of these organic crazy brushes that I downloaded from the web and really start to chip away at it. So now I'm going to paint with black. And I don't like the way that looks. Let me go back in time a couple steps. Yeah, let's see if I can find a couple cool brushes here. Yeah. And if I start building it up, maybe change my brush every once in a while. Yeah, now I'm creating something that looks definitely much more organic than what we had before. Change it again. So we add in a lot and then we take it away. Having a graphics tablet in this process is kind of a good idea. I have some graphics tablets that you guys can use and continue to work with here in class. Yeah. That's better. It's better. I don't think I like the color of mine. I make it a little bit lighter. There we go. One other thing that's kind of neat that a lot of folks tend to look over is that we have the brush tool, but we also have the pencil tool. And a lot of folks, they don't like working with the pencil tool because it gives you very, very crisp results. But for highlighting, it's actually not a bad idea. Yeah, because now I can come in and just create very small scratches where I want them. I'm just painting in some very small, fine detail. Kind of just scratching away the surface. You know, whenever I'm doing scratches, I try to think organically here. I try not to let my mouse cursor or my paintbrush stop at any one place and really start to focus on any one thing. Yeah, go ahead. Can you put a layer mask on a layer mask? No, but you can put a layer mask on a group, right? So if you wanted to do a compound mask, you can just throw that layer into a group, into a folder, and then mask the folder. Yeah, throw it into a group. All right. So this is going to take some effort. This is going to take some time to continue to flesh out and work on. I'm going to pull a Julia Childs here. Look what's cooking in the oven. And zip ahead to the one that I made. where I've spent all of my time going in and working with my brushes. So you're going to want to do this by hand, and it just takes some time to get really quite comfortable at it. And you can see the illusion that we're crafting here with all these highlights. Okay, just going in, highlighting it very quickly, knocking off some of the edges, and yielding kind of a cool result. Okay, a couple other things, couple other suggestions that I would like to just kind of reiterate and reinforce when you're defining metallic objects, especially things that are going to go on walls. Think a lot about color palettes. Okay, try to find colors that complement each other. Get into the mindset of a real-world painter. People just don't pick colors willy-nilly and throw them together, right? There needs to be some sort of intelligent thought behind which colors you're choosing to put on your texture. Often this is a hard process, trying to find color palettes that work together. So let me show you a really great extension to Photoshop that will allow you to do it pretty quickly. Okay, excuse me. So if you go to the top of the screen where it says, window, we have this extensions section here, and we have this cool extension called color. Color gives us access to a free resource that's designed by Adobe. It's called Color, but really what it is, it's a color wheel. It's an artist's color wheel. And this allows you to very quickly go in and establish a whole series of colors based on a series of rules. Okay, so you can select your rule up here. Let me zoom in so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So finding colors that naturally go well together can be a little bit of a challenge, but there's a whole mathematical equation that defines complementary colors to each other. This is what color is all about. We can select our base color just by left-clicking and dragging here in the color wheel. And then you can see that down here at the bottom, the algorithm is naturally and going very quickly finding all of the complementary shades to that color. And it's all live. We can left-click and drag, which is pretty cool. We can change the rule. Maybe we want to use the monochromatic. I use this one a lot, especially for textures, because now we have shades of, in our case, kind of shades of this lovely brick red that naturally work well with each other. If you want to find opposites, triad, complementary is a good one. I love this, okay? Because we want to make sure that the colors that we're choosing to infuse in our objects work well with each other. Let's not reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. Adobe Color is a fantastic addition into our tool set because it's going to give us colors that naturally pair and work well with each other. So, for example, let's use some of these colors as the core of my, as part of the core of my system here. I'm going to change. Let's see. I'm going to change it. Let's do this. Let's do shades of. Oops. Let's do shades of green. Make it kind of a darker. I want mine to be kind of more like a military green. So maybe I lower the brightness and lower the value a little bit, desaturate it. Kind of find that olive drab. Yeah, there we go. That works. Okay. Because now I can color pick. If you look at the way I've structured my entire palette over here, here we go. So that's my rust layer. Here's the red. So maybe I want all of my red to be that color. Oops. That's right. I have to, I think, double click on it, copy the hexadecimal value, then paste it in here. There we go. Excellent. Just change that color interactively. And now maybe I want this outside area to be like this green. Copy it, double click, paste it in the hexadecimal value. Boom. And not enough of a contrast between those two shades, so let's do this darker green. This is really the power and the joy of working inside the system, is that we can continue to art direct after it's all done. Okay. So if my client comes in and says, Pat, I love everything that you've done, but I kind of want you to start over, it's not the end of the world. Not the end of the world. Okay. A couple other things that I want to remind you when you're working through the system. Don't forget lettering, badges, lettering, on-screen text are going to make this thing feel a little bit more real. Clearly, I need to kind of revise the colors of my little lettering, the caution signs and what have you, to match the green and those other things. But that's just all a solid color layer, and I can very quickly change that foreground color without having to go in and redo my entire project. Okay? You're in the driver's seat when it comes to choosing the color that you want your object to be painted, and you're also choosing, and you're in the driver's seat of where that is going to be placed down using the tools and the techniques that I've shown you today. Think in layers. Think in layers. Metal layer, paint layer, or metal layer, rust layer, paint layer, some sort of layer on top that's going to, break up the paint layer into a whole series of different tonal values, and then highlights with that silver and some of those grunge brushes on top. Okay? It makes a difference. It makes it kind of pop and scream almost immediately. You have to start thinking like an actual texture artist now. Okay? You got to start thinking about what details and illusions we need to craft in order to get us where we need to go. Questions? Yeah.
For that, all of those different colors there, different groups, or did you just paint it in the same group? I mean, like, so there's different masks for each one.
Yeah, this one I didn't put each layer into a group, but I could have. I absolutely could have. If you look carefully, it's the image, it's the layer mask that's determining where that paint is going. Okay? This thing here is determining where all that dark green is going. Okay? The paint bucket tool and the brushes allow me to interactively choose and decide where I want that green to go.
Well, a little bit different subject, but after we created the images,
Uh-huh.
and then move into the back to the Modo and to put the UV map, images of the UV map, always showing that the final image color is brighter than the Photoshop image.
It's a brighter, yeah. That's
and then a weaker.
yeah.
How can we fix?
So it's a little bit of a challenge, especially when we're putting these images back on our models. Let me show you. I actually have a file here already crafted. Let's go into my shader tree here, and here's kind of a really cool trick. A lot of folks, they forget about this little feature when working inside the shader tree. If you have one texture for this entire object, you don't necessarily need to put it in a material. Okay? So I'm going to go Add Layer, Image Map. I'm going to go find the image that I want to use. Oops, wrong button. And bear with me just for 2 seconds as I navigate to the completed project file here. There we go. Ta-da, looking pretty good. Looking really good, actually. A little bit of a wonkiness there, but I can fix that later. You don't necessarily have to have it in an actual material if it's being applied to everything, right? The materials are really only something you want to use when you want to separate out certain elements from one another, okay? In the game art pipeline, you're not going to get materials. We're not going to be relying entirely on materials to define the surface characteristics as we're used to doing here in Modo, okay? Here's my little trick for game art. Don't worry about it. If this is what the texture looks like in the OpenGL viewport, this is what it's going to look like over in the game engine, because they're working on very similar pieces of technology. Specifically, what Tomoko is responding to is that. Okay, inside of our entertainment packages, the lights in our scene are additive, right? So the lights that we have, like I have a directional light here, are going to influence the quality of, well, not necessarily the quality, but how that texture is going to look. Okay. If I turn it off, now the global illumination system is really kind of driving how this image is going to look on my scene. Okay. But working with lights can be a little bit of an issue. One way that we can kind of sidestep this, and I hesitate to even show you this, is that we can change the gamma resolution, not the resolution, just the gamma values of the texture itself. Okay. And I have my texture selected. In its properties values, let's just put this to like 2.2. A little bit darker. Oops, I went the wrong way. I don't know what the value is. It's 1.0 divided by 2.2. Yeah, now it's become much, much darker, and it's a little bit more representative to what we're seeing in the OpenGL viewport. Well, sometimes your lights can wash out your textures. So that's why I'd want to do it, just to make sure that what you're getting on the surface of your mesh looks like the actual image. Yeah, a good place to start, and this is something that you're going to have to kind of fiddle with. It's very, very scene specific. But if you take your gamma and you divide it by 2.2, so what you'll yield is a result that's 0.4546. That gives you a pretty good starting point. Pretty good starting point. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's going to do everything. That's going to do, basically, it's going to affect the gamma of the entire image. What we're doing here is we're reducing the gamma on just the texture. So. You're welcome. Okay, I want to kind of end class today by talking about one additional new element. Over the past couple weeks, we've been focusing a lot on working in our diffuse texture pipeline, but that's not the only thing that we want to be able to craft and generate. For this week's homework assignment, you're going to be making a really cool little blacksmith shop sign, okay, or the texture for this really groovy blacksmith shop sign. And I want to walk through a couple ideas on the texturing side that are really going to be important for this object. I think I just want to export out just the UV map for this bad boy. Oop, and I need to fix my UVs. Here, for me and just for the demonstration purposes only, I'm going to just going to get this in here. Let's just do fit UVs. Huzzah. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to export out just what would be the sign portion of my UVs. All right, and here we go. Texture, export UVs to EPS. Let's put it on my desktop, and I'll call this sign UVs. So I want to show you some elements over in Photoshop that will help make the realism for your wood texture a little bit more apparent. So let me open up that file. I'll just make it 1024 by 1024. There we go. New project file. Same setup. Just stroke it. Value of 1. Make the color really outrageous. All right. All right, all right. So here's a couple ideas. Let me open up. I got a wood grain texture here that I want to use for this project. Let's find a cool wood grain texture. I'm just going to use a real basic one. It's kind of interesting. Let's see what that gives us. The reason I chose this particular image is that I like that it's all one board, or actually it's multiple boards, but you really can't see the illusion of the planks. For something like this, the plank thing isn't going to work because this sign isn't a planked texture, right? It's not like a fence, or it's not like a crate. There we go. Yeah, that's better. I like. Excellent. That's starting to look pretty good. Okay. Let's do this. Let's put a logo on my little sign here. That might be kind of fun. How about I'll just make a really silly custom shape. Custom shape. What do we want the logo for this blacksmith shop to be? How about what do I want? What do I want? I want the logo for my little blacksmith shop to be this cute little bunny. Yes, there we go. I am the bunny blacksmith. Excellent. Okay, so We often want to have logos for our objects, but we got to remember that we need to integrate these logos into the texture themselves, okay? Now, right now, does it look like that bunny is a part of this wood? No. It doesn't look like it's actually been painted onto this wood grain. It looks like I made a silly bunny in Photoshop, and it's on a separate layer. It's not integrated at all. So how can we start to blend both these two layers together? Say again?
Set it to black and then use a paintbrush over it?
That could work, so make a layer mask, right? And then just interactively take out pieces of it. That's not a bad idea. Well, how else?
Maybe switch the blending mode and see which one you like.
Trying the blending modes is going to give you a neat result. Let's see what we get. We're going to try both of those. Let's just experiment with the blend modes. So there's the blend mode. There's the overlay blend mode. Now, one of the things that I've noticed when working with these blend modes is that oftentimes the value of the interior of our bunny is going to change. Okay? Now it's a much lighter green. I kind of liked it like that, but I just want to see some of the wood grain pattern in there. So some of these blend modes are not going to give us the result that we want. Okay, now it's way too dark. Way too dark. Not dark enough. Lighten, totally wrong. Screen, silly, silly. No, grrr. This is not giving me the result that I want. Okay, this doesn't look like it's painted on top of my guy. So blend modes in this particular situation, maybe not the result that I want. Okay, I really like Rebecca's idea of using a layer mask to go in and control where all of these paint strokes are going to be. Fantastic idea. However, let's take a step back for a second here, okay? Let's look and think about how we can integrate logos with a layer mask. Because we want this object to look as though it's part of this wood grain pattern. We want it to look as though the paint has been painted on this piece of wood, not our own kind of defined piece of wood.
Is there a way you can use the wood grain to make a brush?
Absolutely. We're not going to use a brush, but we're going to use the wood grain to make a selection, which we then can use as the foundation for our layer mask. Okay? So check this out. This is actually pretty cool. I'm going to deactivate my little bunny. Deactivate my bunny. Okay? So now the only layer that I have active at the moment is my wood grain layer in the back. If I go over to my channels tab, I want to just kind of cruise through all of my red, green, and blue channels. And what I'm looking for here is the channel that has the most contrast in all the pixel values. So I want to have some black values in here, but I also want to have some white values in here. I'm going to make a copy of that channel, and that's an important element. We are copying a channel. We are not ever, 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 ever allowed to mess with the originals, right? Because if we start messing around with the original blue channel, we're going to change the original color of this layer, okay? So you always work with a copy. And here's what I'm going to do. I want to do a levels call. Command L and change the colors of it a little bit. I want some dark areas. So where it's dark, we're not going to see the bunny, okay? Where it's white, we are going to see the bunny. So I want to see a majority of the bunny. So I want to make it really contrasty. You can also move around the middle point here. Yeah, something like that. Let's give that a go. I like that. So now that we have this custom kind of grunge map, I can hold down my command key, left click on the thumbnail to select that layer, and go back to my bunny. Let's turn it back on, and then apply that selection as a layer mask. And there we go. Now we're getting the bunny more integrated with that logo. Absolutely. Let me go back in time a couple steps here. All right. Let me turn off my bunny. All right. Let's do the entire thing once more. So the only layer that I have visible